Welcome to the Leadership Gambit podcast, where we share life lessons to guide you through your journey to survive and thrive in a volatile business world. And now, your host, Dane Smith, with leadership and management expert, Chris Miller.
All right, Chris. So today I want to talk about something that we both have talked about quite a few times, and I really became aware of when I started working with you. Now, for our listeners, today's topic is going to be something that you can use both on a personal level and professionally. And it's one of those things I think a lot of people are probably already doing, but they may not be conscious of it yet. And so that's why they haven't really learned how to use it strategically. The other thing is it's really easy to pick up and start practicing. And I'm talking about the art of framing our communication. It doesn't matter whether it's an email, whether it's a phone call, a text message, whether it's face-to-face or you're doing a presentation. Framing is key.
Yes. This is literally one of the most powerful things I have learned so far, and I now consider it foundational to so many other skills that it's something that I coach everybody that I manage on.
So why don't we go ahead and start then with why it's such an important thing to understand and practice. Just a level set real quick for everyone on what it means. Framing is determining how you present your message, whether you're telling a story, using metaphors and analogies, showing contrast in your stories, explaining something from your perspective or a third person. Those are all examples of framing you might use depending on the outcome you're looking to achieve. And that's important, the outcome you're looking to achieve. Framing is not a business skill. It's a communication skill that applies to all areas of life. Now, depending on the goal of your messages, how you frame them will determine how the person receiving the message perceives it. Chris, I think one of the most well-known examples is probably glasses half empty or half full perspective.
That would be an example of mental framing and how you're perceiving the signals or whatever the inputs that you're receiving.
So, Chris, why don't you go ahead then and talk about some of the benefits of framing?
So it benefits everything, and like you said, not just at work. How you frame something is going to determine how the other party receives and feels about it. And that's the important part, how they feel about it. Framing, like how you frame things is actually to determine whether people listen to you or not, right? It's going to determine whether you get buy-in from people, whether you make people feel inspired or energized or demotivated or demoralized. Yeah. It's the difference between creating calm or conflict, right? Whether we connect easily with people or not. Whether people understand us or not. My experience has been that it's often overlooked and not appreciated enough, but because it's used in everyday life, I do feel that, outside of the key benefits of influence and buy-in and, the connection building and all that, it also, mastery of it will give you a massive advantage against other people.
Do you want to go ahead and provide an example of framing in use?
Yes, actually. So there's one that I really like to use that I usually tell most people when I'm in this discussion. And it's actually a good example showing how marketers use framing on us in public generally. So there was a study done years ago where they were testing different branding on yogurt containers. And they were trying to figure out which one will people gravitate to more towards that's sitting on the shelf. So they labeled one container they did this as a comparison test. So they labeled one container 20% fat content, and they labeled the other one 80% fat-free content. Now, I mean, obviously they mean the same thing. But the study found people gravitated towards the 80% fat-free because of the positive framing, right? And this is actually a really important rule about framing information. Loss aversion is much stronger for most people than potential benefit. So when you're framing things, you want to focus more on the loss prevention or mitigation than the benefit gained, if that makes sense.
Hang on real quick. You used a phrase, loss aversion. I'm not familiar with that. What's a good example of that?
So there was actually a book that came out a few years ago called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it provided two good examples. So there was a study done and it involved a coin toss, right? Easy, relatable. So let me ask you this actually, Dane. Let's play a game of coin toss, okay? Heads, you win $150. Not bad. Tails, you lose 100. Is this a gamble that you would be comfortable making?
Well, the answer is no. I don't want to lose money. There's the obvious potential loss with that.
So the majority of people in the study, like you, Dane, the majority of the people in the study were not comfortable making that bet because the potential loss outweighs the potential pleasure from maybe winning, right? There's that what if. So there was actually one other study done, and I thought this one really illustrated it well as well. And this is how people can be influenced on how decisions are framed. So there was a scenario, people were brought in and they were given the situation where they were told a disease was going to break out and it was expected to kill 600 people.
Oh my God.
They were then presented with an option and it was framed as, you will definitely save 200 people, right? Now, obviously 400 people are going to die as a result of that, but it was framed as, you will definitely save 200 people. And when it was framed that way, people chose to save the 200 lives. Like, they were quick to make the decision, yes, I want to save the 200 people.
Yeah.
When they were presented with the same option, but instead of framing it that 200 will live, it was framed as 400 will die. The same decision, the same outcome, but people were much more hesitant to accept that decision.
Interesting.
The second example, and this is what the study found, because it was framed as a loss, they realized people were much more averse to the loss, even if it was the same outcome.
Do you think then that the loss aversion versus the potential benefit ties into what we spoke about during the How to Better Control Your Brain episode, with how our threat response is much stronger than our reward response?
That's a really great question. I actually have no idea. We would need to ask someone way smarter than me, my friend. It does make logical sense, though, from a chemical perspective, but I can't speak to a correlation.
Chris, I got to ask this because somebody out there is asking, how is this not manipulation?
It is used for manipulation by companies and politicians and the media all the time. So it is used for that purpose. And maybe this is just me rationalizing it for myself, but I think it's the intent that determines whether it's manipulative or influence. So, and just to quickly define that, to me, manipulation is about using it for self-serving purposes with others, where you only care about your own gain, right? And it uses, or the people use maybe underhanded tactics to achieve what they're trying to achieve for themselves. But if it's coming from a place where you're using it to rally people to a cause or achieve better outcomes for, the collective group, to me, that's not manipulation, that's influence. And look at major social movements, right? They frame things from an emotional appeal messaging perspective intentionally to try to get more people on board, but it's not just about them. It's about the wider cause or issue that they're trying to rally people around, if that makes sense.
Sure. Oh, it does. It does. So it really comes down to intent and approach. So if it's for a collective good and you're not intentionally, let's say, obscuring or misleading people, then you'd say it's not manipulation. Is that correct?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Although, let's be honest, Dan, I'm sure that there's some people that will say that we're basically having a semantic argument right now. And either way, it's still a form of manipulation. But if that is your view, everybody manipulates everybody if that's the case all the time. And at the very least, I would argue, knowing the tactics that are being used by these companies and marketers, by these governments and politicians, by researchers, like, it's a good thing to understand what others are able to do and use on us too, I would argue.
So what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes then that people make in using framing?
Making everything about themselves, right? And it's not just people either. A lot of businesses make this mistake all the time where they market everything as about them and how great they are as a company, which is why you should pick their product or why you should hire them. But remember, people do things because they want to and because it's going to benefit them. They're not doing it because someone else tells them to.
Right, exactly. I mean, I suppose doing something because you want to keep your job would qualify under this as well.
It would. And that's all rooted in our biology, right? Like, we are biologically predispositioned to be selfish. And that's not exclusive to humans. Everything in nature is programmed to survive, Therefore, there is a selfish element to everything in nature. Now, that being said, we have our selfish chemicals, right? Like our dopamine and our adrenaline. But then we also do have social chemicals, serotonin and oxytocin, which are triggered through social cooperation. So my assumption is anthropologically and biologically, we're actually intended to have a balance of community versus selfishness, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, everyone internally will always consider what everything potentially means for them or to them in their own life.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those autopilot things we just can't control. It's just sort of how our brains work.
It is. And, this isn't a judgment, but to be clear, it's literally how we are designed biologically. So this is by no means a judgment. I think the important thing to understand is that we all do it. And to your point, it's one of those kind of autopilot things that our survival brain does, because it's scanning for threats and things like that all the time, right?
Yeah.
Which we also talked about in Better Brain Control. But this is why messages that are focused only on what you need or what you want are not going to get as much attention from people. And think about this. How many messages, ads, notifications do you think people receive in a single day?
I would guess hundreds. Hundreds.
Yeah, and you know what? The latest research has found that is in the range. Like, it is typically dozens to hundreds, depending on how many subscriptions you have and how many, sites that you've signed up for and everything else. But knowing people are bombarded with hundreds of messages a day, potentially, every day, the chance of yours being something they actually pay attention to, even at work, right? Everybody's got massive task lists, typically, unless you're sitting around, on your hands. Most companies, that's not how it is. And you have to somehow do something to cut through all of that noise to be paid attention to. And that's where, when we talk about framing, getting one level deeper into the what's in it for me technique, that's where that becomes critical.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, let's go ahead and talk about the what's in it for me technique. And so we're all on the same page. The what's in it for me technique is about positioning your communication based on what the other person's going to get out of it. It sounds weird, but it's typically framed from a pains and gains perspective. That means understanding what pain point you're going to be solving for this person and what the person's going to gain. It's about putting yourself in their shoes and their perspective, which, by the way, if done right, taps into your empathy skills.
It does, all of those things that you just mentioned. And one other really important thing to note, if you're someone who's trying to be a person of influence, I would argue this is the most important skill that you can start to build foundationally. And always keep in mind, when you're thinking through the what's in it for me, that features tell, benefits sell. And people find that a very easy, kind of catchy line to remember. And it's something that I always keep in mind myself now, right? And I've actually seen a lot of companies out there still who focus on themselves and their features without articulating the benefits that the actual user or customer is going to get. So, look, you and I used to do this with our marketing for our training services, right? We did that whole, I think it's still on the website to this day, actually. So why don't you explain kind of, what we went through and the difference between the features versus benefits for the training services, just to illustrate as an example for people?
Yeah, sure. So features would include what products are included, topics covered, number of days, whether it's virtual or in person.
Right. Yep.
And then the benefits from that would include better customer experience, increased profit margins, better employee customer satisfaction, reduced turnover. You get it. You get it. So the benefits should be positioned from an outcome perspective for that person.
Absolutely. And you can go wide, like you just mentioned a bunch of the benefits, right? And you may want to put all those in kind of your pitch to the people that you're putting this in front of. But if you want to take it to the next level as well, then what you want to try to do is really isolate what are those, one or two big things that your person or your audience care about. And what you want to try to do is evoke some sort of mental image or emotional reaction from the person that you're presenting to as well.
Okay, so how would you do that then in the case of my training services?
Okay, so let's say there's a manager that you're working with on the customer side. Okay, and let's pull
Okay.
out the benefit of the improved profit margin as an example. Okay.
Okay.
So, and not the let's say it's the director. Let's say the director of the team is the one who makes the decisions training on the training spending, for example. Okay.
Hmm.
They have a limited budget a year, and most directors and VPs, typically have some sort of bonus tied in with revenue generated or margin obtained. So in that case, what I would do is I would actually kind of personalize my pitch to that director, focused really on the benefits of the cost savings or the margin improvement that we typically see from the solution. Because what you're trying to do is evoke this mental image in them of them picturing themselves in the future, basically achieving their margin and getting their bonus payout at bonus time, right? Because if they're picturing themselves getting that bonus payout at bonus time, and I wouldn't go in there and just say, picture you getting your bonus. What you want to do is paint an image that that's where it will logically lead to in their mind.
Sort of going down a parallel that makes them think about it, even though you're not directly talking about it. That kind of a thing.
Exactly. Right? Like most of our customers have achieved a 5% margin improvement. What would a 5% margin improvement mean to you? And you ask them that question, and they're going to start to think, their brain's going to trigger all the what ifs. And one of those what ifs is going to be, I'm going to get my bonus. And they'll picture that.
There's another tactic that a lot of us use, which is using analogies and metaphors. This is something I use a lot because I'm trying to explain complex topics in simple terms. Let me give you an example. So if I'm talking about the challenging competitive landscape, that doesn't really have the same emotional impact as if I say the competition is killing us,
That will definitely get people's attention much more.
Yeah, and I remember there was one you used to use on the leadership team, which was something like toxic people and rumors are like a cancer on the team's culture, and we have to deal with them immediately.
Yeah, I would hope so. I was directing that at you. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, but and I think I used to say this as well. The reason I used to use that, Dane, because over time, it will eventually kill the team culture, right? So it felt like it was a suitable metaphor. That's why I used it, and I personally find that metaphors pack a much more emotional punch than a bunch of data and facts spilled out on a page or in a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the analogy side, I can actually think of a couple that we've used recently in how to better control your brain. I think we talked about how the brain is like a battery, and it's constantly needing to be recharged with food and hydration. Which, by the way, if you haven't listened to that, it's out now, and you really ought to check it out. Or if you have, you might need a refresher. You never know. And then in how to build habits, we used an analogy about how to get a gorilla across a football field. I remember that.
Yeah, that was a really impactful one to my career. And that one's also available for everybody out there. It's one of our launch episodes as well. So make sure you definitely check that one out if you haven't.
Okay, so that's metaphors and analogies. Real quick, even though it's a huge topic, I just want to briefly talk about storytelling. Storytelling is a skill that absolutely has to be learned, especially if you want to lead and manage or get people to buy into your ideas. Business storytelling isn't the same as writing a story for a book.
Not at all.
It's very much an abbreviated version, and some of the big things you need to make sure of are providing the context, defining who, describing the challenge or the issue that's happening, explaining actions taken, including a resolution or a result, and summarizing your key messages.
Absolutely. Well, and this is an important thing for everybody to remember. People will always remember stories over facts and data, even those that consider themselves the logical ones, right? It's just how we're wired. Our species is predispositioned to tell and listen to stories, right? Like it's built into our ancestry. And it's been one of our primary ways of passing down knowledge for centuries. I can tell you that feedback I've had from dozens of people personally is that it's the stories that they remember, not necessarily the details, though, right? The best stories resonate emotionally with people, and that's critical because people will remember how you made them feel way more so than what you said.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you can combine a good story that makes them feel with a memorable and easy to repeat message, it becomes even more powerful. And that's how things can go viral, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? We should definitely do an entire episode on storytelling and go through the process in detail, starting with storyboarding and breaking it down from there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I know there's so much more to talk about with that subject, but I think for now, at least in this context, I think we've covered the basics. Is there anything else you want to add?
Actually, yeah, and maybe this is a good jump off from like the whole storytelling idea, but there was actually a story that really helped me understand how much of an impact framing can have. And I know this is one I definitely told you.
Are you talking about the Cola pilot story?
Yes.
Ah,
Of course. It is one of my favorite, right? I have to.
Exactly.
So there's a book I highly recommend everybody read by Robert Cialdini. I hope I said that right or pronounced that right, but it's called Persuasion. And it talks about let me back up for a second. It's really more advanced psychological techniques, just to level set. And it talks about how you can persuade someone, quote unquote, which is essentially kind of priming their response to be yes before you even ask the question. Okay? So there was a story in it that I really liked where he talked about two researchers, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to test, does framing make a difference in engagement and response from people? So they went to some malls and they posed as these researchers that were there to do a cola pilot. And they went and asked people that were coming through the mall, do you want to be part of this cola pilot project? And basically what it was they would send you, these flavors of cola that hadn't been released to the public yet for you to try as part of the pilot group. And then you could provide your feedback, and then they would make decisions on what things went to market as a result of that. So when they asked it that way of, do you want to be part of a pilot project for cola, only 33% of people were actually willing to give any sort of personal information to them. Okay? So that's important to remember, that number. 33% under that framing of...
Would you be a part of this?
Do you want to be part of this pilot project? Exactly, okay? Then they changed the way they framed the question, and they started asking people, do you think you are an adventurous person? Or would you consider yourself an adventurous person?
Who's going to say no?
Okay. 97% of people said yes.
Well, I guess some people said no.
But let's be honest, though, Dane.
Yeah.
In reality, do you really think 97% of the population is adventurous? I would say no way in hell.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so, and this is what they figured out, and this is why the framing was important. So when they asked the question, do you consider yourself adventurous, what they've actually realized through neuroscience studies, through functional MRIs and things like that, is that what the brain does is it acts as a Rolodex. And when you ask the question, are you adventurous, it actually goes through and picks out all of the memories that you have of times you were adventurous, and it filters out any memories of your non-adventurous side, which would be the majority of your time because of your daily routines and things like that, right?
Yep.
But because they asked it that way, when they went to ask, do you want to be part of this cola pilot program, 75.7% of people said yes.
Funny how that works.
So it more than doubled. And it was because people also then needed to be congruent with what they had said, which was, yes, I'm adventurous. So they prepped them for the yes before they asked the question. Okay. Now, there are a few things that play here making this happen, but for today's purposes, just note that A, there's an example of storytelling. B, this is an example of how framing made a completely different change to the outcome.
It's a great example. I've read that book. That was one you suggested to me a while back. And I think that's actually a perfect example of that. Yeah. We will definitely need to do a deep dive on the psychology underlining that story in a future episode.
Agreed.
Well, good, good. Chris, we've gone through a lot today, and we've really covered a lot about communication framing. Do you want to go ahead and take a second and sort of summarize some of the key takeaways so people can start putting this into action now?
So let's start with the outcome, right? Always consider when you're drafting some sort of communication or communicating with somebody about something, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve of the interaction? And then look at how are you saying what you're saying, and is it going to help you to achieve that outcome? Now, when it comes to getting buy-in, alignment, influencing people, selling things, whole list that goes on and on. The what's in it for me, and we talked about that, that is one of the most important things that you can learn and start practicing. And what that was framing things in a way that either are making clear what pain point you're going to relieve for the person, right? A lot of times that's time or money, or what kind of gain or potential gain or benefit the person will receive. So that's the what's in it for me technique, absolutely critical. We also talked about using some of the mechanisms for more complex type subjects and simplifying them through the use of metaphors, through analogies, comparisons or contrasting. Comparisons would be, you're looking at your solution versus a competitor's solution, and you're framing yours as good and you're framing theirs as bad, that kind of thing, right? But you're doing some sort of contrast or comparison where you're saying, current state bad, future state good. So that kind of thing. Then when we talked about metaphors, and the reason to use metaphors can add more emotional impact, and analogies can make things more relatable. And just to quickly call back, we also talked about how loss aversion is much stronger than potential benefits when you're framing that what's in it for me. And we told one of the stories of framing it as saving 200 versus killing 400, meaning the same thing, but the negative connotation led to worse results, or the negative framing led to worse results.
Right.
And then we also talked about how important storytelling is and how we as people are wired through our ancestry, through, the way our biology works, to remember stories. So get out there, start practicing storytelling with your friends, with your family. Some people will join Toastmasters. That'll help them. But just get out there and start practicing these things, and they will get easier, you will get better, and you will see results.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there to take in. And I want to point out to everybody, if you're sitting there listening and wondering, where do I start? Personally, I would suggest starting with the what's in it for me. I think it's one of the most critical things you can master, and I would focus on that first.
And remember, features tell, benefits sell. So always be thinking about how what you're saying is going to impact the other person, and is it going to help you achieve your goal?
Features tell, benefits sell. I like that. All right, Chris, any final thoughts before we get going?
I do. I think communications is a life skill that every single one of us can afford to get better at and keep trying to get better at our whole lives. I truly believe if we could all communicate better, we wouldn't have half of the issues in the world that we do, honestly. Right? Because it requires more empathy and understanding and try to find middle ground and all that. And by practicing some of the things that we discussed today and sharpening those skills, I firmly believe, and I've seen other people flourish because of it, it gives you an edge over others professionally. And it is absolutely foundational to things like buy-in, alignment, your ability to build influence with others. And hey, if you're a manager or leader, mastering those skills is going to help elevate your brand over your peers who haven't. It's going to help you stand out and get ahead even more. And look, if you're not a leader or manager, you can still benefit from this. By applying these ideas to your communications throughout your life, you're going to have a much better ability to control the discussion, to control your responses to the discussions, to control the outcomes of discussions, or to even energize and inspire other people. Anyone can learn and benefit from these skills, and there is your what's in it for me.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time to go through this. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We really do hope you got some value from this. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
This has been the Leadership Gambit podcast with your host, Dane Smith, and leadership and management expert, Chris Miller. If you like our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment or review, make a donation, and most importantly, share us with others in your network. Visit us